Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning has opened in theaters, so now it's time to rank all 8 Mission Impossible films from worst to best. And in last place is Mission Impossible 2. There's a scene in this film where one of the characters is at a horse race and needs to figure out which horse to bet on in order to obtain the information necessary to continue on with their mission. I can think of no better metaphor for this film, as it seems the studio did indeed bet on the wrong horse when they hired director John Woo. This is a very frustrating film, as the plot is not that bad, but what good elements the plot has are overshadowed by John Woo's over-the-top directing and Tom Cruise's performance inflating his ego. The plot about a virus being unleashed is pretty typical spy movie stakes, and there isn't anything inherently wrong with it, but what's remembered more about the film is all the more infamous elements. The intelligence of the first film was nowhere to be found, as we instead get overly bloated action, martial arts sequences, explosions galore, and a clunky script with cheesy dialogue. Ethan Hunt is also written in this movie as extremely unlikable and is pretty hard to root for. There's a good film in here somewhere, it was just destroyed by the director. Number 7, Final Reckoning. While I ultimately gave Dead Reckoning a positive review, I had significant reservations about its central threat, an all-powerful artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, this sequel doubles down on that concept, and not in a good way. The AI antagonist, already a stretch in the previous installment, now feels even more disconnected from the grounded espionage-heavy roots of the franchise. The idea of an omniscient, manipulative algorithm steering world events feels less like Mission Impossible, and more like a rejected Black Mirror script. There's even a scene where Ethan communicates directly with the AI, and it plays out like something from a mid-budget sci-fi movie, rather than the globe-trotting spy thrillers we've come to love. The film also suffers structurally. It leans heavily on flashbacks, at times resembling a glorified clip show. Hey, remember this villain from 5 movies ago? Remember that thing you did in Ghost Protocol? While some of this nostalgia works in moderation, the frequency of these callbacks starts to feel like filler rather than meaningful reflection. It's as if the movie is trying to emotionally cash in on its legacy rather than building something fresh. Pacing is another issue. This film is essentially one half of a sprawling 6-hour story split into 2 parts, and it shows. It drags in places and could have benefited from a tighter, more focused narrative. A crisp 2-hour finale with a clear arc might have packed more emotional and narrative punch. As it stands, this extended goodbye to Ethan Hunt and his team feels drawn out, and while it does attempt to land some emotional moments, they don't always hit as hard as intended. That said, when it comes to action and stunts, the film delivers. The set pieces are once again jaw-dropping, a testament to the franchise's legacy of practical effects and high-octane choreography. Even when the plot falters, the visceral thrill of watching Tom Cruise defy death is worth the price of admission. In the end, this is a flawed but still entertaining farewell to Ethan Hunt. It may not stick to landing story-wise, but it reminds us why we fell in love with the franchise in the first place. Sheer relentless spectacle. Number 6, Mission Impossible. Taking a TV show from the 60s and adapting it for a modern audience while trying to keep the tone and spirit of the source material can be a tricky task. A task director Brian De Palma pulls off masterfully. The cast is fantastic, and the plot is so engaging that even when the pacing is slower, you don't notice. My favorite scene in this film was when Ethan Hunt is hacking a computer. This scene goes on for about 10 or 15 minutes, and normally dragging out the tension like this would draw attention to problems with the film's pacing, but somehow the director was able to make the scene so engaging that you don't notice. Compared to the later films in the franchise, there's not a lot of action in this one. It plays out more like a mystery thriller, and is more character and dialogue driven, and it's all done terrifically. There's great twists and a satisfying payoff, and it laid the groundwork for the later films, with the exception of the second one, very well. Number 5, Dead Reckoning. I'm happy to say this plot feels a bit new and different than the other ones. However, the threat in this plot will feel a bit dated in a few years. Unlike the previous films where the threat is a rival country trying to send missiles or poison the water or hack government secrets, the villain in this film is evil AI. I get they wanted to make something that's a hot-button topic right now, but in a few years the plot for this movie will probably show its age. Rival countries threatening America is always going to be a relevant topic. It's been that way ever since the James Bond franchise, and there's a reason it's used in other spy thrillers like Jack Ryan. However, the commentary on AI will set this movie back in a few years, instead of feeling timeless. And what this AI can do is at times a bit far-fetched. While the previous films in the franchise have all been somewhat grounded in realism, except for Tom Cruise's over-the-top stunts. My other issue is that while the third act, and honestly the whole movie, are fantastic, the third act's climax feels a bit reused from the first movie. However, the way it's done in this movie is like a better version of it, which makes sense. This is a 2023 film as opposed to 1996. But honestly, those are my only issues with the film. Even though those are small nitpicks, it's reminding me more of a street-level MCU film. I kind of want to see Christopher McQuarrie do an MCU film. Let's see what he can bring to the table. Number 4, Mission Impossible 3. What John Woo destroyed, J.J. Abrams fixed. This is such a step up from Mission Impossible 2. It takes everything that worked about the first Mission Impossible film and does it even better. The action is more exciting, the plot is more engaging, and Philip Seymour Hoffman is arguably the best villain in the franchise. There is nary a dull moment in this film. There's either action or an exciting heist. The film also introduces us to Simon Pegg's character, who after this film becomes a franchise regular, and he's great in this film. There are a few too many plot lines in this film, though. I didn't really care for Ethan's love life, and the spy twist feels a bit out of nowhere, included just for the sake of having a plot twist. And Ethan can now suddenly perfectly read lips, which was not set up in the previous films, so that also feels like a skill that comes out of nowhere. If we had seen him learning that skill in flashbacks, that wouldn't be a criticism, but as such, it feels like they threw it in there for plot convenience. Philip Seymour Hoffman, like I said before, is definitely the standout performance. It's a fantastic return to form for the franchise, and mostly manages to improve upon the first film, because nothing in the second film was brought up in any of the other movies, which is also a huge plus. Number 3, Fallout. The performance that really steals the show in the movie is Henry Cavill's mustache. Joking aside, though, Cavill is fantastic in this film, even if his character twist is a bit telegraphed. He does close quarters action really well. The action is even better, with the standout sequence in this film being Cruise having to hold his breath underwater for an extended period of time, which also makes the audience hold their breath in anticipation, as Murphy's Law is fully applied in the sequence. Anything that can go wrong for Ethan does go wrong for Ethan, and Simon Pegg, as always, provides a lot of humor. The climax is a bit over the top, with Henry Cavill and Tom Cruise firing machine guns at each other while flying in helicopters, but it's still not as silly as Mission Impossible 2. It's a very solid entry to the franchise. Number 2, Ghost Protocol. Whenever I talk about Black Widow in my MCU ranking, I always bring up how it reminds me of this. That's a good thing. Brad Bird's style in other films such as The Iron Giant and The Incredibles has always been about the Cold War or the 60s, and his signature plot style is on full display here. It feels kind of like what Matthew Vaughn did in X-Men First Class, which coincidentally came out the same year as this. The ensemble cast, as always, is great, and the tone has a great balance of humor and edge. There's moments where Brad Bird pokes fun at some of the tropes of spy movies, such as when gadgets are messing up, but it never goes so far that it lets the film fall into parody. It still very much manages to stay true to what it is. The action in this movie is incredibly well directed. Every Mission Impossible movie has at least one iconic scene you remember, and for me, it's the skyscraper scene. It's tense and exhilarating. The villain in this film is a bit one-dimensional and isn't that interesting, which is disappointing and surprising, considering this is the same guy who created Syndrome. And number 1 is Rogue Nation. This is definitely one of the darker entries in the franchise. It feels like it has the highest stakes. The plotline at the end of Ghost Protocol is masterfully continued here. From its exhilarating opening scene of Tom Cruise hanging off the side of an airplane, to the tense opera house assassination attempt sequence, to its brilliant third-act twist, this is a compelling, gripping spy thriller from beginning to end. Everything ties together perfectly, which is more than I can say for some of the previous entries. The plot has the best flow, the acting is top-notch, and it's just a darn good spy thriller action movie, and it comes in at number 1. So go ahead and share your ranking of the Mission Impossible movies, and I'll see you next time.